Um,
Hi all and welcome to this past marathon in analytics. We're excited that you could join us today for Gabriel Villa's session on Azure Analytics on AWS. This past marathon is a back-to-back live webinar session, and it is delivered by expert speakers in the past community. This session will be recorded and posted online after the event. You will receive an email letting you know where and when to get to it. My name is Andreas Bergstedt. I'm moderating this session from Wokingham in the UK. I have a few introductory slides before I let the reins over to Gabriel. If you require any technical assistance, please could you type in your request in the questions pane located to the right-hand side of your screen, and someone will assist you. This questions pane is also where you may ask any questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to enter the questions at any time once we get to the Q&A portion at the end of the session. I will read out the questions to Gabriel and he'll be able to answer them. You're also able to zoom into the presentation content by using the zoom button located at the top of the presentation window. Please note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session. This will pop up after the session ends in your web browser. Your feedback is really, really important to us, so please help us out and fill it out. It will help us greatly for future events. Keep learning all year long. Visit PASS.org and check out all of their free educational resources available to PASS members. Connect, share, and learn. This PASS session is presented by Gabriel Villa. Gabriel is a skilled leader and architect and technical expert focusing primarily on Microsoft technologies and is passionate about open source technologies for integration, automation, and development. His versatility extends from systems, data, and development, and leverages hybrid SaaS and cloud integration with proven software engineering platforms and best-of-breed data management and business intelligence solutions. And now I hand over to Gabriel Villa for this session.
Great. Thank you, Andreas, for that awesome intro. Couldn't have said it better myself. And welcome everybody to this past marathon. I hope some of you are attending not only this one, but some of the other great content that's going on today. I know that we will be having these back to back, and so we are very limited in the time. So let's kind of just start to jump into it, okay? So we really just gonna talk about analytics on AWS. I want to go over some of the whys and why you would want to do analytics on AWS and dive into architecting a solution, go over some of these services, products and services for analytics, and just kind of walk through a particular business case for an online retailer and go over some of the products used and the maturity for that particular solution. So the big why, right? You know, data is now a lot more available to us, and as you can see, it surpasses oil as the world's most valuable asset, right? Data is coming from everywhere, from IoT, wearable devices, to all these applications. You know, not only just the back-end data that drives business applications, but the log data and data inside from the monitoring your applications that are running. And so there's just so much that can be utilized that you can take and make value to, right? So, you know, the benefits of putting or doing your analytics on the cloud, of course, you can handle that through big data, right? Big data, what exactly is it? Well, as long as there's a lot of volume, um, and of course with the economics now and the amounts that you can pay for storing data, it really isn't that easy to, I mean, it really isn't that difficult to amount to a large set of data, whether, again, it's on a database or on, uh, blob storage. Of course, it can easily scale up and down on demand. You're paying as you go, and you got this security aspect of things, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about all these different benefits as we progress. So why specifically analytics on AWS? Well, as you can see, and it is a contender and probably the leader and pioneer in Amazon in cloud technology. AWS has a long history when it began with just some of the services like message queuing, then virtualization, that kind of like grew into uh, notification services, um, database, relational databases, blob storage, and so on and so forth. So now it grows so much, and I'll go over that particular catalog of things of services available to you, and we'll kind of discuss how that can be used and leveraged for your solution. So still kind of driving into the benefits of AWS, right? And to get this out of the way, right? One of the major components of or one of the major reasons why you would use any cloud service is really the fact that it's a managed service. To notice that the keyword is not a server, but services, right? It's a service. So kind of consider, outsourcing your IT and taking a lot of the pain points or a lot of the a lot of the pain points from patching systems and backing up systems, even just the main uh, steps to acquiring servers and your procurement process, and taking all this from your networking and setup and putting it somewhere where it can be outsourced and be taken care of by somebody else. So your cloud service is obviously going to be managing a lot of these, um, a lot of the, I would call them headaches that you're probably used to in IT and such. And then of course you have the ease of scalability, right? You can start with one, you can grow large, or you can scale down as needed as well. There's been cases where you try to uh, request for that capital to implement a particular project, but of course you don't have a return on investment right off the bat because you've had to buy such a large server thinking that this is going to be needed. We're going to utilize all this, but the growth of this data or storage that will be utilized is going to take 2-3 years. So why spend so much up front when you can start off small, go large, or you think you're going to go large, things end up being a lot smaller. You actually just bring it down as you need it, right? And so this comes down to paying only for what you use, right? So consider this, it's really just a utility. You can leave it on, like your lights. When you have your utility, you have your lights and you turn them on when you need them. You turn them off when you're not using it. So the same thing with services on AWS. And of course, lastly, you have an ecosystem of services that work together seamlessly to be able to produce solutions like analytic solutions, on the cloud. And so let's talk a little bit about what this looks like, right? Architecting a particular solution. And I want to start off just really a little bit of a focus on the conceptual um, design or the conceptual architecture for a solution, right? So in analytics, you require more than just the data, right? And you require more than just the ingestion and storage. Um, there's a lot of things that come into a particular solution that takes you from A to Z, right? So what you're seeing here is a conceptual architecture that summarizes the process, where it not only includes data ingestion, storage, processing, but we're also talking about, how do we get everybody on this one particular platform and being able to utilize all this data, for business value, right? So kind of just starting off on the left, of course, you need your sources. And right now we're not talking about on-premise or data centers or anything like that. We're just talking conceptually. You need data, right? Whether it's a third-party data or your internal data, custom data, unstructured, semi-structured data. These are all your data sources that one would need, or that obviously would have on hand at any given time, really. And then, of course, you need to start to ingest this data, right? So data starts to be, you need to start moving it somewhere. And you have data movements that can be scheduled, like your batch jobs or your nightly loads, just on a particular interval, whether it's daily or minutes or whatnot. But you can also have abilities to ingest data in real time and stream data, right? Like there's real-time streaming. There's also a possibility in a analytic solution. And so when you start to store this particular data, you also have options to how you want to store the data, right? Blob storage is a very, very popular way of just dumping data that's coming in, specifically or more commonly used for real-time data. And of course, you have your NoSQL solutions, where if you have structured, semi-structured, or even unstructured data that you want to sit somewhere, rest somewhere, then it can go into a NoSQL solution where you have that flexibility of putting all this type of data. Then, of course, you have your very common relational database, right? A lot of this data, internal or third party or whatnot, could come already in a relational format, and basically you might just be doing some sort of forklift and moving that into another relational database, right, for a lot of use. Then this is where the reporting and analytics comes in. Notice how we have on the very top, data that's connecting straight to the source, right? This is because there's different people in organizations that can leverage the data that's been brought in near real time or untransformed, right? Still in its purest form, to be able to do analysis from. And there's tools that will allow you to query that data, do crunch numbers, to do data visualization directly from these sources that are being stored. Of course, the more advanced or the data scientist type can also take this data and do machine learning off of this, right? So there are the capabilities to start doing some predictive models or any other AI functions that you can leverage or do based on the data that has just been stored, basically lift it and just drop somewhere for it to be utilized. Below that particular box on the bottom right, right before that, where you have your cogs, of course, is your transformations. So at this particular point, you can start transforming the data that was brought in, whether it was real time or at some interval, and you transform it, and you can start putting it into an enterprise data warehouse, a data mart, or you right here we're depicting even that some data warehouse on the cloud as well, right? Taking into consideration this is conceptual. This could be on premise. This could be on the cloud on a particular vendor. So let's moving along. Oops. So from here, we kind of can take that conceptual design and have it a little bit more focused. I seem to not be clicking away. Andres, do you see another slide?
No, Gabriel. Unfortunately, your you're not moving through your presentation.
All right, that's what I can see. I'm trying to click to the next slide, and I do apologize, people. Please bear with me.
Gabriel, can you exit presenter mode in PowerPoint and reopen it, maybe?
Right,
Perhaps.
that's exactly what I'm doing. Unfortunately, you mentioned what to do if you have technical difficulties, but none of what you've said applies to me. Oh man, it's coming. It's coming along, folks.
Do you want to unshare your screen?
Oh, that was just I had that on pause, so
Oh, I'll see.
you
There we
should
go.
see my.
Yeah, it's now moving along.
Thank goodness. All right. Sorry, folks. It's just trying to get to the Big Bang here. Okay. So this is where we wanted to go. We talked about conceptual. So let's talk about how this conceptual architecture looks for analytics on AWS, right? And I'll talk a few about some of these services, but this is taking that concept and let's talk a little more about the actual products of how you can actually produce or have this in the solution created on AWS. So we still have on the left, we still have all the sources, just like we talked about. Assuming that your sources could be on the cloud at in another vendor, in a other virtual private cloud perhaps, or it might be locally somewhere on premises at some data center. You have the ability to connect via a particular gateway from your sources securely into your virtual private cloud on AWS. That connection could be there's a multitude of options to use securely. A very common one is a VPA IPsec connection. So your data is encrypted and secure going from one location to your cloud. When we talked about the ingest, there's options for actual data movements, right? So DMS is a popular data management services. It's called. It's popular for relational data to be able to connect into a source outside of the cloud or outside of your even account, or even within your account on AWS as well, and do the heavy lifting of extracting data from relational databases and bring the data onto the cloud. With DMS, you have the ability to have conditions on the data, filter data, maybe even do some very minimal transformation, but not really recommended when you're working with a DMS. However, data pipeline has a little bit more flexibility and power to be able to, if you need to, also do transformations on that particular movement. But it's more recommended for this particular use case, or what we're talking about, just on this particular concept, taking that data from sources, lifting it and putting it somewhere in where it can be stored. And then, of course, if you want to talk about real-time consumption of data, whether it's Twitter feeds or some sort of clickstream, Kinesis Firehose gives you that ability to have that data coming real time, be extracted, do analysis or transformations within Kinesis, Firehose itself, and put into storage just as well. So you have your real-time options, and you have your data movement that's more of a interval-based options. One other thing about DMS, one thing I left off, and it's a pretty popular thing to use, is you can leverage change data capture. So what's interesting about that is that you can use change data capture for your relational databases when you want to actually migrate that particular data from one location to another. The other thing that you can also do with is you can actually migrate from, let's say, from a SQL Server to Postgres, SQL, or MySQL, with very, very little complications. Now, what's interesting about that as well is for a lot of us that might be aware or know the complexities or the differences in store procedure languages in different database engines, DMS does a pretty decent job at translating stored procedures as well. So if you have stored procedures written on SQL Server and you're migrating that in to MySQL, it will actually migrate these stored procedures as well and do some level of transformation and migration to transform that data into, or to transform the stored procedures into the actual support code for SQL Server in this particular case. And then, of course, let's talk more about the actual storage, right? AWS has various options for storage. Probably the most important or probably very highly popular currently is really using S3. And S3 really gives you the ability, when you're thinking about open data formats and you don't want to lock yourself into some proprietary data store, you want to just use S3 to drop that data in there. So if basically you have data that's relational and you're going to do some sort of consumption and you want to convert it into ORC or Parquet or even a CSV file, then this is the service you want to use to just drop the data into. Then you also have your DynamoDB, which is your NoSQL as a service solution. So earlier when we talked about managed services, you kind of question, well, what exactly are we talking about when it's a managed service? Well, DynamoDB is a managed service where you can go into the AWS console, start go into the console, kick that off by creating a table on the console, and just like that, you can start dropping data to read and write from. Right, so there's no need to provision a database or even a server if you want to go that far behind. Get a server started, install, let's say MongoDB, CouchDB, or some of the other NoSQL solutions out there, and then configure and connect to. You're bypassing all of this. As a managed service, you can use it on DynamoDB. And RDS is similarly managed service for relational databases. So you kind of get a concept where Amazon likes to use the S a lot, so it's like relational data services, data migration services, you kind of get an idea as you start getting familiar with these services on AWS. RDS, it has options for different relational databases from MySQL to Oracle and so on. And again, in this particular conceptual design, if we were to stick to what we had on the concepts, so now for the top right box is where your data analyst can start crunching away with that particular data that's either stored on S3, RDS, or DynamoDB, right? You can start crunching numbers directly using something like Athena, which Athena is it's an analysis tool that you can actually use to query data like a Parquet file and use a SQL-like type of language directly off of Athena. But if you need more programming access or more processing, and you want to leverage Hadoop or even Spark, you can use EMR. That's your Elastic MapReduce. So that's your Hadoop managed service that you could do. So Athena and EMR, a lot of use for exploring the data and doing data discovery. This is really not for the typical business user. This is more for your advanced data analyst, data scientist, that level of understanding. Of course, you can also start doing visualization with a tool called QuickSight that will allow you to connect into any of the databases on RDS. It will allow you to connect to data on S3 and DynamoDB to do visualization as well. Now, if you want to go the more traditional route of your reporting and analytics, then you start working with Glue. And Glue will actually give you the ability to take the data that you already have stored inside your AWS account or your virtual private cloud. It's not going to allow you to go outside of the cloud to get the data, but within the cloud, now that the data is stored, then you can start doing the processing, transforming, and possibly taking it to the next level, putting it to dimensional models and put it into a more traditional data warehouse like Redshift. Redshift is the data warehouse managed service provided by AWS, where again, RDS, your relational data services, just as well can be spun up to host your data warehouse. So as far as the products are concerned, based on that particular architecture, we talked about storage, S3 being that low-level storage that you can think of as, just drop data in there in different formats, whether it's going to be JSON files, whether it's going to be Parquet, CSV files. You can basically take it from whether it's just been pushed into S3. S3 has a lot of capabilities and a lot of powerful APIs that you can actually just dump data into, and it's very durable. It's available all the time. Well, I won't say all the time, but 99.99% of the time. But now you kind of can think of your S3 being the location, or it could be that very first choice of open format data. Get everything you need, drop it in there, start reading from that. Again, like we talked about, DynamoDB is more of the flagship NoSQL solution. It's a managed service and utilized a lot for key value stores. It's schemaless, right? It accommodates unstructured data. Then the RDS, again, like what I had said, it's really your relational database services, and as you can see here, it has the engines available to you for you can spin up MySQL, you can spin up MariaDB, Postgres, Oracle, and SQL Server. Caveats to MySQL and Oracle, I'm sorry, SQL Server and Oracle is there is a fee for licensing for that as well. Oracle does participate in a bring your own license ability. So, however, SQL Server does not. So you would pay for a portion of the license for the amount that is being used on AWS, as well as paying for the actual service. And your data warehousing option, right? The Redshift is your cloud-based enterprise data warehouse. It uses the massive parallel processing technology, and it's distributed. It's a distributed cluster-based, again, fully managed. So the provisioning and maintenance of this particular service is taken care of in the back. It's fully elastic, so it can be kept up all the time. You can bring it down as needed. Processes, depending on the size that you can use, you can actually dynamically tell it that you need more power, more compute, or you can also digress that as well as needed. So for the ingestion piece, we talked about a little bit as well, data migration services. Again, being able to kind of forklift relational data that's available to you, bring it into Amazon, whether you're dropping it into an S3 bucket or you're dropping it into some other endpoint that is relational databases. And your Kinesis Firehose gives you that ability to tap into the real-time analysis or the real-time streaming of the data, whether it's QuickStream, whether it's Twitter feeds, things like that. So let's kind of dive a little bit into the AWS Management Console and look into some of these services available. Okay. What's amazing about this is you have all these components are separated in the AWS console. All the services are categorized by the category of analytics, as you can see here. You'll see everything that we were pretty much talking about. We talked about Kinesis, we've talked about EMR, Athena. What you don't see are some of the databases that we've talked about, because you will see these on the database side. Right, so you have Amazon Redshift, RDS, DynamoDB. So you pick and choose what you're going to have to be utilizing, this is the separation of that. So in RDS is one quick demo that I kind of want to just go through. So when we talk about managed services, much like a lot of the offerings on AWS, this means really that you're not spinning up a server yourself and you're not installing and configuring software. You're creating this by just basically just clicking into a particular menu, like, hey, what is it that you want to create? I want to create a database here. And we're going to go with SQL Server because probably a lot of us on this call have the experience with SQL Server. And so these are the options that you would have, right? Express Edition, of course, we know that we don't have to worry about licensing on this particular case. And then, of course, if you had just signed up with AWS, you do have 1 year of a free tier, which gives you about maybe 750 hours of use per month that you could use a database for. So if you were new to this, you can actually say, hey, I'm actually going to be using this free tier, but I know that my particular account's been around for a little bit longer than that. But just to get to this particular point, you have just your options that you walk into to how you want to actually fill these things in, right? So here's just asking for a name, right? And it kind of just gave you a name there, but I'm just changing that up. You cannot create a password for an SA user, but your master user essentially is the system administrator here in this particular case. And then, of course, for security purposes, you can auto-generate some of the passwords, but I am not going to do that. I think I might need to. There you go. And you do have options of what sizes you actually want to build on certain things, right? And AWS does have a calculator, a estimator that can allow you to estimate what that potential cost might look like for a particular service. And that calculator can actually be calculated for all the services that are on AWS. Now, one thing to mention is AWS has multiple regions, and the pricing does vary per region, oddly enough. So one thing to keep in mind, right, is that if you are concerned about price, you can look at the estimator and look at the differences on the regions. Now, they're usually not significant differences, but differences nonetheless. And then also one other tidbit to kind of understand that not every region has all the same features, right? So oftentimes when new releases are kicked off or new releases are come out, um, they deploy that, and you'll find it in mostly the U.S. East 1 region before it gets distributed to all other regions. Quick tidbit there on that. Of course, like many managed services, you have the ability to configure the amount of storage, the amount of space. For SQL Server, for instance, you can integrate Windows authentication, so on and so forth, right? Here you see actually an actual cost of what this will cost to to run this on a monthly basis, right? But because this is kind of consumed with time, or kind of short in time, I'm basically I already have a database created that really, if you can see here, just like anything else, you just connect directly into your database from your local machine using the credentials that you've created, just with a particular endpoint from Amazon, and you use it just like anything else, right? So there's just one quick example of some of the managed services available to you on AWS. Again, we talked very it's very popular to use S3, right? I did create a particular bucket for data that you can actually start using off of Athena. Again, Athena is your it's really just your discovery and analysis tool that you can use to query with SQL-like languages from data in like buckets like these, right? I have a particular CSV file here that has soccer data, because again, I'm a big soccer fan, that can be utilized. And so kind of want to go back into a particular use case here. All right, so the main point is, how do you actually get from that one particular point where we showed the conceptual architecture and going into from that concepts of, these are just your conceptual things, these are just very general options, and we've talked a little bit more specifics about the tools and what you can actually use. But in a well analytics maturity model, a lot of people are really in that first phase of what you need to know. This is what happened, right? What are our weekly sales in this particular case, right? In this particular business case, client wants to know what are our business sales, right? That's just historic data. You get data, you have it, you're dropping it, on a nightly basis, and you can run reports off of that. Of course, this is weekly sales, so in reality, you can just wait till the end of the week, tally all that up. A lot of people can be in that particular step of their maturity to get to something more like, all right, well, what if we need to understand why did somebody abandon what they were shopping for, right? There's different other reasons that, did the price go up somewhere else? Did the system just fail? Were there issues with our servers? Were there issues with the application? So the diagnostic piece, now you're talking about how can we utilize other tools to identify and answer that why question, right? Then, of course, you start moving into the more AI things, or the more of the AI, and talk about how can we predict the purchases, or how can we target certain customers, right? So now, based on what you had on your descriptive, based on what you had from diagnostics, you start collecting all this data in volumes. Now you can start creating predictive models around all that data and start understanding what your targets are like. What are your clients like? What should they be purchasing? What can we push them to purchase? Why can't we get them to come here and purchase? Right? And then of course, the very added value of the spectrum, the highest one of your maturity model is, can we actually recommend products based on the web browser, right? So this is an analytics model, right? That can be going from, let's start with this first step, and then let's get to much bigger steps, right? So this is how it evolves, and these are some of the tools, and these are some of the products that are used to get there, right? Descriptive, again, it's just storing that data. What was bought, what was purchased. You start taking all that information. You're at the phase where you're understanding, historically what's being purchased, and you can run numbers against that. But if you want to get more into the diagnostics, you need to start progressing in your stack of tools. You got to become more, get more tools like analytics and Athena to be able to analyze that data. How do you figure that out? How can we read log files so we can understand what is happening in our application, to where it's like making customers go away or not want to purchase with us at the end. Then, of course, your predictive and your prescriptive. This is using all sorts of tools, right? Going from your machine learning, and even QuickSight, your visualization tool, actually does in AWS, has some predictive capabilities or some features where you can do some of these things. And in your machine learning piece, AWS has a tool called SageMaker, which is kind of based on your Juniper notebooks, and be able to create more machine learning, or do more of the machine learning development in languages like Python and R, and run them in that particular service against the data that you would have. So, kind of going to that very first step of your descriptive, right? You just want to know, hey, how are we doing, right? So you have your sales data, you have product information. Something as simple as data migration services lifts that data and dumps it into S3. It can generally just take it from a relational database, put it into CSV, and then start reading off of it from Athena to report on it from a day-to-day basis, or in this particular case, on a weekly basis, be able to see, what are our weekly sales like? You join that with products, your sales numbers. Again, Athena has the capability to write, SQL-like queries against that, and you come up with these types of reports in your analytics here. So that's the very first step, right? Taking that existing data, dropping it into a bucket. This becomes data lake to analyze, right? No transformations, and descriptive. You're on your first step of your maturity model. But now we need to know more, right? Now you need to know the next few steps. So in this particular case, you still have the descriptive in here, right? So you're still collecting sales data, and you still have your product information. The data is still going into S3, and you're still reading it from Athena, right? But as you can notice, some of the arrows, you can actually start going from S3, have some level of transformation from Glue, and that data can go into a Redshift and into a data warehouse, right? So even at this particular case, your typical weekly sales report can now be consumed or reported off of Athena, or now you can create visualizations and say, we're going to create a dashboard on QuickSight, and now we can report from there. But we also want to start getting that diagnostic piece going. Why are they abandoning our shopping cart? Why are they not finalizing that purchase? What is happening that this is making us lose because we just didn't have enough people, or we didn't have enough sales from here for whatever reason. So now you can start analyzing clickstream data. You can also start analyzing things like logs from your applications or various applications that are happening. Even if you want to get as advanced into, what are your competitors doing at that time? Are they sending out tweets about, reduced prices on their stores or so on and so forth? Somebody must have seen that in Pinterest or Facebook or Twitter, anywhere else, right? People still use Facebook, right? And then, of course, you get to that point where you can do your analysis from a data analyst or a senior more, sophisticated data analyst from Athena, reading that data that's coming from Firehose, from S3, whether going directly into S3 or after it's being transformed. But you're at this level now. You keep building into it, right? Then the very last is that, from the very mature spectrum of things, you have your sales data, you have your clickstream data, you have things coming in real time from Kinesis, you have data just being moved at some sort of interval through DMS. There's data going into S3, there's data going into DynamoDB, you got unstructured data going in there. Now you can actually transform everything from any of your sources that you already have on storage on AWS, and now you can transform it and start putting it into a dimensional model. You can start putting it into visualization. But then you can actually start using your machine learning, right? This is where SageMaker can come in for your regression models, right? To predict, when somebody will purchase, or any kind of prediction that you might have a requirement for in this particular case. So all this data that you've been storing, into S3 and DynamoDB has given you enough data that you can actually train your model and have a pretty good prediction coming out of what you're doing from there. Meanwhile, you're still creating your same weekly sales report, a little bit more sophisticated and more data probably than you can actually hope for. And then you're also being able to allow for that diagnostics of, why are people not shopping at the very last click after they filled up the shopping cart and so forth. And then you're at a point where you can do predictive as well. And so it is the maturity of analytics on AWS, really the tools that you have available to you, and how you can actually mature from that conceptual and just taking those small little baby steps and crawl, walk, and run, another way to kind of look at it, into having a more sophisticated architecture for analytics on AWS. So with that, I know that we have to allow a few minutes for questions. So, Andreas, are there any questions that I should address?
No one's posted any questions so far. I guess if you're an attendee or if you're attending the session, now would be a good time to perhaps post a question.
If there isn't, I do want to show that AWS Calculator, while people decide whether they have questions or not. So.
Sorry, I just have a question that popped
Go
up.
ahead.
Right, so this question is asked about where does Databricks fit into all of this? And this is from Sonal.
Okay. So in the marketplace, what Amazon calls their particular marketplace, you can actually launch a virtual machine or virtualization with Databricks, uh, basically um, already configured and installed. And really, the way this kind of looks like, and I'm just going to go through a few of the steps that I've uh, been able to see, is that there's a AWS marketplace where you can actually find Databricks configured in a virtual machine that you can actually work from. It's not really a managed service because now you're actually running a EC2 instance, which is your compute virtual machine. So outside of maybe just updating the server or whatever, just permissions and such, EC2 is managed. It's a managed virtual machine that you can actually have a Databricks instance from there. The other option to do is, well, really, it's really the only option I really know of. So that hopefully that kind of answers your question or it gives you that direction to get there.
Sure. Thank you very much for that one. We also have another question from Jamilia,
Mhm.
asking if you have any advice on how to get started in AWS if you're just doing some learning on your own, not work related, but just more personal development.
Right, absolutely. So if you notice that when I went to demonstrate the launching of the RDS instance, you have a free tier option in there. So in reality, if you just go to AWS, um, you to create an account, you can actually you'll get the opportunity to create your account, and for 1 year you'll fall under the free tier category. So in that free tier category, you get to use a lot of these services for free, so long as you keep in mind, if you're not using them, you shut them off because they have limits like 750 hours for a database, or you can spin up as many as 10 servers, but all that time accumulates, and you'll start getting charged after the fact. But it's a very good place to actually start, uh, for free. The other thing too is AWS also has what they call AWS training, and they have a digital library of a lot of these um, features or a lot of these services where you can learn kind of just that get started tutorial on things like, I want to get started on DynamoDB, and they have a 5-minute video of how to actually get started with it. So if you tie that in with your free tier account, you get rock and rolling pretty quick.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. We have no more questions at this time. If we have another 5 minutes, so if you have anything else you'd like to demo, there's still some people on the session, then that would be great.
Right, no, so I think like I'd mentioned, the very last thing that kind of mentioned, you see here, the AWS Calculator is really a very, very good tool to use to be able to start thinking about, when you want to use a particular service, what is this going to cost you? So Amazon is very good at making it very inexpensive for you to say, I want to get my data on the cloud. So getting that data in the cloud is not going to cost you anything. So moving that data using data migration services, regardless of how big the table or how many records you might have, it's going to be free to get the data into the cloud. Getting the data out of the cloud, that's where it's going to be costly. Of course, it's not really significantly expensive, but nonetheless, you do start paying at that particular place when you start to get the data out of AWS. So to kind of just estimate when you build a solution, what it is that you're going to be paying for, this is a very handy tool to be able to allow you to do that. So if I were to just say, I want to do a EC2 instance, which would be, it's the very first one. Um, I'm going to add this. I'm going to add a server. These are the options you would have when you were to, if you were to add an instance. Of course, if you're going to go with Linux, it's very inexpensive by the hour. When you go to Windows, you can see the prices change, mainly because you're also paying for a licensing fee. What's cool is that Linux already, they do have a instance of Linux that already has SQL standard installed, or web or enterprise for this case. Um, Again, that price will vary because of the licensing for SQL, right? But of course, you have your options of virtual CPUs and how much memory you want. The I/O is a very big thing. So if latency, that you want to have very little latency, then you obviously want to go with the higher I/O. Um, but this is the kind of stuff that you can use to start thinking, hey, how much is this going to cost me? Well, this one's a very high I/O. We're talking about on demand, and it's going to be used 100% of the time, right? Of course, another thing is they have different billing options. So if you want to pay partial, if you want to pay up front, that price will also vary. So it can go down based on, if you actually want to pay cheaper. And then, like I also mentioned, prices may vary if it were to be in a different location. So if we were to go again with Windows, did we go with Windows? No, I don't even remember. I should have kind of kept that in mind what it was. But I think it was this one because of the IOs. Um, no, this one's a Linux one. But just very very nifty tool to be able to use. Again, a lot of your services are in here. As you get familiar with them, you can start utilizing that so that you can try to estimate what that cost is going to look like. So please don't get freaked out by that price right there. And I'm definitely not an AWS salesman, so just clicking things away.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Gabriel. So we're now at the end of our session. So if you can just go back to the slide deck, please, Gabriel.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to just remind everyone about the next session. And thank you very much for everyone for attending. And the next session is presented by Anil Maharajan, and it's on Power Query and Power BI to tell a story from your Facebook data. Yeah, thank you all for attending. And thank you, Gabriel, for a
Sure.
lovely talk.
Thank you, everyone.